It's time to broaden our views on history, a Dakota War historiography. This blog post relies heavily on the scholarship of William E. Lass in his article titled Histories of the U.S. Dakota War of 1862, published by Minnesota History Magazine in 2012. To learn more about the historiography of the U.S. Dakota War, I highly recommend reading the article. Anyone who writes history engages in a selective process. William E. Lass. Historiography is the study of the body of historical work about any given topic. As a historian, it's important to study the historiography of a topic before delving deep into the research and formulating an argument. For example, before researching and writing my master's thesis about the Pampas Indians of Argentina, I was required to read 13 books about the history of Argentina during the 19th century. This helped me understand the historical context of the people and places I would be researching. But while historiography has become essential to studying history, it also raises significant questions. Questions about who is writing history and how and why they came to their conclusions. A very brief historiography of the U.S. Dakota War of 1862 demonstrates how problematic our views of the past can become. By relying on a single viewpoint, that of the white Western world, we are limiting our views of the past to a single set of cultural influences and backgrounds. For better or worse, history is an unbroken line of narratives that build off one another and are influenced by each preceding narrative. Our stories are shaped by what we've been told and what we've been taught. Our stories are a reflection of who we were and who we are. We get to decide where the narrative goes next. 1864. History of the Sioux War and Massacre of 1862 and 1863 by Isaac V.D. Hurd. 1864. Dakota War Whoop, or Indian Massacres and War in Minnesota of 1862-63 by Harriet E. Bishop McConkie. 1864. A History of the Great Massacre by the Sioux Indians by Charles S. Bryant and Abel B. Murch. 1891. The Indians' Revenge, or Days of Horror, Some Appalling Events in the History of the Sioux by Alexander Berghold. 1904. Indian Outbreaks by Daniel Buck. 1908. Great Sioux Outbreak of 1862 in Minnesota in 3 Centuries, Volume 3, by Return I. Holcomb. 1924. A History of Minnesota, Volume 2, by William Watts Falwell. 1956. The Indian Wars of Minnesota, by Lewis Harry Roddice. 1959. The Great Sioux Uprising by Chester M. Oler. 1961. The Sioux Uprising of 1862 by Kenneth Carley. 1992. Over the Earth I Come, The Great Sioux Uprising of 1862 by Duane Schultz. 2006. Let Them Eat Grass by John J. Koblus. 2009. The Dakota Uprising, A Pictorial History by Curtis A. Dolan. 2019. Massacre in Minnesota, The Dakota War of 1862, The Most Violent Ethnic Conflict in American History by Gary Clayton Anderson. 2023. Reclaiming Minnesota, An Alternate History of the U.S. Dakota War of 1862 by Colin Mustful. History is both a product of our time and a product of the compiled times that have come before us. Even in my own writing, which began in 2007, I can see a significant change in how I convey historical topics related to the U.S. Dakota War. The history hasn't changed, I've changed. Looking back through these sources, each one is a clear reflection of the time and place in which it was written. Moreover, there is a clear pattern regarding the cultural and ethnic backgrounds of the people who share and proliferate this history. On its own, that's not a problem. Everyone has a right to take an interest in and share history, to share their views on history. But when you review these and thousands of other sources on the U.S. Dakota War of 1862, it's obvious that certain voices are missing. That is a problem. Today, there is a lot of excellent scholarship being done by indigenous scholars in Minnesota, such as Brenda Child, Anton Troyer, and Wazi Wawatin. But when you look at the thousands of sources on the U.S. Dakota War of 1862 that have been written over the past 160 years, and how the perspectives and messages of those sources have influenced present views on this history, it becomes apparent that it will take a lot more than a few indigenous scholars to reframe the entire conversation. What's more significant is the structural framework of our society that has enmeshed itself so deeply in who we are that the opportunities to learn, understand, and convey such historical messages is and will continue to be dominated by an all too narrow cultural viewpoint. As a historian, a writer, a human being, I am a part of it all. I cannot offer any immediate solutions. I merely wish to contribute to a more even-handed, level playing field where historical narratives, discussion, conversations, and scholarship are shared through any and all viewpoints, whether they be Western, white, and educated, or Native and traditional. This and other factors contributed to my decision to create the Reclaiming Minnesota Indigenous Writers Grant, a literary diversity initiative to raise $10,000 for one Indigenous writer from Minnesota. While I continue to try to understand our history and its legacy for us today, I want to facilitate and support those viewpoints outside of my own cultural, ethnic, and religious background, while also helping others make their own contributions to the historiography of the U.S. Dakota War of 1862. I want to view history objectively, fully, and I cannot do that until all voices have been heard. I want to see the conflict. I want to see ourselves from all sides and all perspectives so that I can truly understand what happened here and how it led to who we are today.